Good morning and welcome to the week 3 edition of the Valley Sports Weekly Roundup. We've got a lot of action on the plate for this week, and so we'll just kind of jump right into it. Quick hits around the Valley. Was wet and sloppy action everywhere, and it wasn't any more evident than in Grant and Sylmar, and that was a 21-33 finish. Verdugo and Wilson followed the same pace. Verdugo Hills dropped that one 14-22. Arleta overcame Santee 22-20. Birmingham dropped one to Westlake at 12-32. Real quick on that one, Birmingham, for the second year in a row, is winless in their non-league going into league play after their bye coming up. So that'll have some questions we'll probably address later. Chatsworth and Reseda. Chatsworth came out on top 47-0. El Camino outlasted San Fernando 45-8. Monroe remains undefeated with their victory over Bernstein 26-14, and that's going to be big news for Monroe moving forward. And we can touch on that a little later as well. Pauley had no answers for Eagle Rock, and they lost 52-7. Taft got back to 500 in the win column with a win over Diego Rivera, 47-6. Kennedy lost to Granada Hills in our Valley Sports Telegram game of the week, which we will get into a little more. That was a score of 62-18. Panorama also remains undefeated with a 43-14 win over West Adams. Van Nuys picks up their first win of the season with a 7-0 win over Hollywood. And Cleveland Cavaliers did what they've been doing and got the W over Canoga Park, 35-7. Some of those games really kind of tell us that there's teams turning the corner, teams getting hot, and some questions just looking across the board.
Yeah, for sure. The first thing that kind of comes across is the elements. Friday night, we got a little piece of that tropical storm that kind of slammed into Mexico and hit the West Coast a little bit. And it definitely played a role in a lot of those games we saw. There were turnovers abound in most of the games that happened across the valley, which is going to happen. The ball's wet, the field conditions are not the best, and a lot of teams sort of struggled, and it kind of played itself out in a lot of the games that we saw. But yeah, going across the valley, and we'll kind of get into it a little bit more. But it was a watershed week for me going into the week because a lot of these teams want to build wins as the league is quickly approaching, especially for Valley Mission and East Valley with the week coming up. And you saw a lot of teams how to step up, put a win in their belt to kind of right the ship a little bit. And teams that have been winning, they continue to. So it tells you that when we get into league play, we're going to have some great matchups coming up.
It's a bit of a hard one sentimentally because you can't help but root for Austin Ward at Reseda. He's an alumni. He is dealing with a mass exodus, and his roster is not what you would expect size-wise for a program of that kind of prestige. But you still got to go out there, you still got to play the games, and to their credit, they're out there and they're fighting.
You have to give some leeway. Like I said, him taking over that program, like you said, with a mass exodus, it's going to take some time to kind of build that thing back to where it was before he got there. And I believe he'll do that. He has an infectious energy about him. I think kids will gravitate towards that. But whenever you have a rebuilding situation, there's some patience that has to be had. Like I said, he's got a 25-man roster. That's tough to go out there and play against certain teams. And it showed this week going against Chatsworth because Isaiah Ramos he's a problem. That kid is talented. He is physical. He is rough. He is hard to deal with if you don't have the numbers to throw at him. And 293 on the ground, 4 touchdowns, and 14 carries. The kid was running all over the place, and it's something he's done this since the beginning of the year. So I think it says something about the fact that they just need a little more time, and Ward needs a little more time to kind of get his numbers back before they'll really be in a position to challenge. I think the kids that he has playing are playing their hearts out. It's just tough when you're undermanned, going against teams that, especially playing against a Chatsworth, where they've got an identity and they're going to beat you up. So, in those sort of situations, perfect weather conditions for a team like Chatsworth, where all they're doing is 3 yards in a cloud of dust as it is. So I think that was the story of that game. Story of that game was as simple as Reseda needs some time to get back to a place where they can deal with a team as physical as Chatsworth, and Chatsworth did what you're supposed to do when you've got the numbers, you've got the manpower, and you've got a back that can just grind people up. We've seen him grind up bigger fronts than what Reseda can put forward right now. So I think it says more about what Chatsworth can do and less about where Reseda is right now.
And the conditions on Friday were perfect for teams that like to run the ball, but you have to take care of the ball.
Yeah.
And taking care of the ball leads me to Grant and Sylmar. And this was a 33-21 finish that epitomized two teams had to play in the same elements. Grant had 6 turnovers in play, and Sylmar had 1. So you can't hold on to the ball, you're not going to win. Special teams wise, Sylmar had 2 kicks that were recovered onside, one of which is kind of dropped in the middle, and before the Lancers realized what was happening, they scooped it up and went right back on offense. And very next kickoff after that, of course they're going to try again. It just worked, and they kind of pooched it onside style, and it was muffed, and they recovered. I mean, 8 total turnovers for Grant. You're not going to win in any conditions turning the ball over like that. No. But speaking of Grant, and that having tried to watch them and see what they're made of, and the quarterback's a sophomore. Hovsepian is a sophomore, and if you give him time, if the line can protect him a little bit, he's a weapon. And he has weapons at his disposal. He's got Kazrick Anderson, who's a senior. And we've talked about Hovannes Kondratian and Jaquel Woodard, who are first-year players that look nothing like first-year players. And so with those 3 weapons, they can take care of the ball. Grant is going to make noise. And actually focusing on them in person this week, it showed me that, when this team takes care of the ball, they can do things. And they're aggressive and they're hungry. I mean, I would tell you that the scoreline was not indicative of the way the game was played, because Grant scored twice in the last 4 minutes to make it look respectable. But that's because they don't stop fighting. They're hungry, and they come at you. And their final score was a blocked punt, which was recovered at the 5 and just walked in for a touchdown. So they have a bye coming up, which is a good time for them to kind of assess and clean up and get ready for league play. And Sylmar, I want to talk more on them, but in all honesty, I feel handicapped because some of the resources we have at our disposal, I don't have enough names and faces to put together, to really go in depth on them. But what they did in taking advantage of mistakes, that's what you're supposed to do. Anytime you get the ball back 8 times, you're supposed to. And all but one of their scores was off of turnovers. But they took care of business, and next week they've got a tune-up. It's a good challenge, and we'll get into that when we look forward. But talking about a good challenge, bit of a wake up. St. Gen was hosting Palisades. As Palisades kind of continues their tour of the San Fernando Valley this season. I'll let you take over on that.
Yeah, so Palisades took on St. John's at LA Valley College this Friday, and it was exactly what you would expect from the team when you look at what the teams have done so far this year. Palisades is going to run the ball at you. They're a run-heavy, run-first team. I think they average throwing the ball about 9 to 10 times a game. It's not really in their game plan. What's interesting about Palisades going forward will be what they do when teams kind of force them out of that one-dimensional smash mouth, come at you style, if they have to actually drop back and throw the ball 10 to 15, 20 times a game, if they get down. But they're so good and they're so sound on both sides of the ball that's not something that normally happens to them. They usually are up and playing from the front, so they don't have to worry about throwing the ball. They're just going to keep smashing the ball, keep smashing at you. And it was more of the same in this game because St. John got down early. They got down big. They were down 28-0 at the half because they couldn't stop Palisades from picking up 5, 6, 7 yards a chunk when they were running the ball. I think a bigger story that's developing with St. Genevieve is the offense is a little stagnant, and a lot of it starts at the quarterback position. They haven't had consistent play from at that position this season, and it's kind of bearing itself out in terms of some of these results because if you're constantly playing from behind or you can't put drives together, your defense is on the field too much, your front seven is tired and beat up, and it makes it harder for them to get the stops to get you back so you can build a rhythm on offense. Right now, they have a senior. Macias is their quarterback, but Mason Wynn, their talented freshman, has been seeing more of the field. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a quarterback controversy just yet, but you can tell that Coach Parr is kind of trying to figure out which one of those guys is going to give him the best opportunity to kind of build some continuity on the offensive side of the ball. They've been beat up a little bit defensively in these games because their defense is always on the field. The first couple of games, they got beat up because teams were throwing the ball on them. Their secondary was taking it on the jaw. Their first 2 weeks, I think their first matchup, they gave up 150 and 3 touchdowns to a receiver. The next week, they did the same thing. They gave up 3 touchdowns when they played Burrows. Burrows' top receiver had like 8 or 9 catches or 150, 160 yards on him. So defensively, they've struggled, but their defensive struggles are probably because of the fact that they have been on the field an inordinate amount of time compared to their offense. So the first thing they got to do is figure out what they're going to do on the offensive side of the ball. They made a good account of themselves in the second half, which shows you that there's some talent there. There's a spark there. They're going to fight and stay in these games. But in order for them to be competitive, if they want to have a chance to win the Del Rey League this year, they're going to have to get something more than what they've gotten out of the quarterback position. In the quarterback this game, both quarterbacks played, I think, but they had a passer rating of 40 combined. They're going to need a little bit more. So that's kind of the story on St. John's. A little more offense to help their defense. And Palisades, the story on them is they're continuing their tour of the Valley, and now they've got a Southern section win under their belts, and they're going to have a chance to put another good win under their belt next week when we kind of get into that later.
I want to touch on the quarterback situation real quick. You as a coach, you want to kind of reward your senior for being there and putting in the work.
Yeah.
But there is a tough decision of, is it actually getting done? And can the freshmen execute better? And in high school, as much as we try to say it's not about wins and losses, it's about developing young adults, and using sports as a conduit for all kinds of different aspects of life, which is true. But wins and losses count, and they matter, especially in the southern section.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you have to kind of make the decision of which player makes us better overall and puts us in a better position to not just win, but to grow.
Yeah.
And
from St. John's perspective, in the southern section, they're in a 4-team league. When you're in a 4-team league compared to like we have with the West Valley, the East Valley, Valley Mission, there's room. There's room for a mistake, right? You got 5 league games, you drop your opener, you got 4 more. If you're in a 4-team league, you got 3 league games. You drop one, there's not a lot of room for error there in terms of if you're trying to win a league title, if you're trying to improve your position and come playoff time. So right now is the time for them, and they've got next week is a big week for them when they go to Burbank or when they play Burbank to kind of try to get this thing kind of sorted out, because we're starting to get to a point. We're hitting the midpoint of the year. We're about to get into league play for a lot of these teams. You shouldn't still be figuring out who's the signal caller by the time you get to week 4, 5, or 6. Because what's the old adage? If you've got 2 quarterbacks, you've got none, right? And I don't think that's necessarily the case with St. John's. I think there's still a lot of figuring out what works best for them offensively. Both of the young men are talented players, but the freshman is a little bit more of a scrambler because obviously he's a freshman. You're not expecting him to have full command of the offense just yet, but he's a bit of a spark plug when you watch him play, because if things break down, he can make a play on his own, which might be something they kind of need because their defense is on the field a lot in these games. They kind of need someone who can move the chains. So for me, maybe it might be time to give the freshman the reins, and if things sort of fall apart, then you lean back on your senior. But they've got to get it figured out one way or another.
And one team that looks like it might have figured it out is El Camino, and they were at San Fernando this past week, and they put a pretty big beat down. 45-8. The game was not really close at halftime. The El Camino was in control throughout. This was a game that, like, some of them didn't really see much rain until the second half.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was physical and it was chippy. Our correspondent there let me know that there were so many penalties that the first half alone took almost 2 hours. And by the time you get into the second half, and now you have rain and you mix it in, you're looking at safety and what's happening with the players. And unfortunately, under 5 minutes to go, San Fernando had 2 players get hurt, and they were both pretty serious. So on that, I don't exactly know. I don't have it at my disposal which players it was. They haven't actually advertised it, but I would like to put my well wishes out for those players, and I hope they recover quickly. I hope it's not serious. You never want to see an athlete get hurt, especially kids. Because you're playing a game, you're playing for passion. And I mean, San Fernando fought. They fought. And we'll see more of them coming up as they get into league play. But they seem to be a team that's ready to kind of muck it up to get play in that grinding style of football. And El Camino did what they came in wanting to do. They put up a statement win. They've got a big one next week, and this kind of should put them on closer to the right track after having gone winless to start the season.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is it was the kind of performance they needed. You're happy to see them put together a win like this, because like we've talked about, or we'll get into it, like with the Birminghams of the world, teams who kind of stack that non-league schedule, that they're 0-3. When you hold it up in the light, it doesn't quite feel like they were that bad of a team. When you look at the fact that they opened up on the road, this was their first time not being on the road against a tough opponent, because they opened up with 3 straight road games at Palisades, at Newberry Park, at Calabasas. That's a tough way to start a season. So you knew this team had talent. You know they have talent on both sides of the ball. That quarterback that junior quarterback, Javen Hall, is a really good player. But you're going up against tough top competition in the city, and you got a couple of really tough Southern Section teams staring you in the face right after the start of the season. Yeah, you're going to have some struggles when you come out. So playing San Fernando, who is not necessarily on the same level as the first 3 opponents you saw, you wanted to see them come out and put it all together. And that's what they did. So that's one of those things that might hopefully it kind of vaults and elevates them, sits them on that right path of being competitive, because like I said, inching closer to league. Now they've got another game next week that's won't be easy, but it's a winnable game, another road game for them. But they get through that with another win, and now you're 2-3 going in the league. They might be a team that the teams that are sitting in the top of that league, like Cleveland and Birmingham and Granada, they're not going to be they're not going to be welcoming them with open arms when they see them sitting there when league play starts. So yeah, good for them. It's always good to get that 0, get that O out of the win column and put your first win up, and we'll see where it goes from there for them.
As we get into that part of the schedule, there's big games, and it seems like rivalries every week. And one we missed out on last week because of the route fire. We've got a replacement for it this week with Kennedy and Granada. The Stanleys did what they've been doing so far this season, and Kennedy put up a fight, but I mean, you were there. I'll let you take it over.
The battle for the Tina, Operation Get Tina, was in full effect on Friday night. There was 2 things that stood out right out at the gate. By 6:30, it was a torrential downpour in Granada Hills. So getting there, getting on the field conditions were very slick. You could tell even in warm-ups, guys were dropping balls all over the place, because first thing that happens when the field is wet is that ball gets slick. So you almost expected that would turnovers, would sloppy play be a factor in this game right away. And the environment. Kudos to everyone who was there. I had tweeted out the pictures. 45 minutes before kickoff, that place was rowdy. Everyone, which is what something you want to see. A crosstown rivalry, alumni are there, the student sections are packed. Everyone was ready for this game. And especially for the Granada Hill side, this was their first home game with fans since 2020, because even last year they didn't allow fans in for their home games. So this was the first time that everybody got to come out. It felt like a packed atmosphere that everybody had missed high school football. Even the PA announcer said it just felt good to see that place packed out again, because it had been so long since they had been able to do it. That aside, it was the Stanley show right from the jump in this game. Dijon and Darrell Stanley, we know who they are at this point. We know what they're going to do. I was interested to see if they would be able to do this against a tough Kennedy front, because that Kennedy front seven can play. They tackle well. They have so far this year. It didn't matter. The Dijon and Darrell Stanley, they went up, over, and around that Kennedy defense over and over and over again all night long. Darrell Stanley, a lot of talk is about Dijon, and rightfully so. He's a senior. I think he's committed to go to Utah. He's an excellent player who is a danger to find the end zone every time he touches the ball. But what we're starting to understand about this Granada Hills team is that his cousin is equally as dangerous as he is. And if you key too much on number one, number two will get the ball and he will hurt you, like he did to Kennedy with 229 on the ground on 10 carries. And he had 5 touchdowns. The young man averaged a touchdown every other time he touched the ball. And it felt like he could have scored every time he touched the ball. He had a couple of touchdown runs where he got hit 4 or 5 times, kept his balance, got into the end zone. He had another run where he made a cut, got outside, and all of a sudden you saw the track speed, and he just pulled away from everybody, took it to the house 77. So any way you wanted it, that's the way he gave it to you in that game. The other aspect of that game, you can get lost in how good Dijon and Darrell Stanley are on offense, but that game being 62-18, you got to give their defense a lot of credit for how they played. Their front seven for Granada, and we saw them when we saw them play our leader. They are some big physical boys up front. And you saw it in this game against Kennedy. Oliver Taylor, Chance Hexamer, Sean Lopez on their D line. They were in the backfield time and time again. One of the things that Kennedy does well, like a lot of teams in the Valley, a lot of the top teams, they can run the ball. We've talked a lot so far this year about Gore Abrahamian, and Abbott. That 1-2 punch for Kennedy, they usually can grind. Even if you score, they can get that next possession and they can just grind you down, pound you, take the ball down the field, give their defense a rest. That wasn't happening in this game. Oliver Taylor had 3 sacks. Sean Lopez was in the backfield. Their defensive tackle double team him. He didn't care. He could split a double team. He was in the backfield making contact with the Kennedy runners all night. Ramiro Rios coming up from the linebacker spot, making plays. There were no broken tackles to be had. Gore Abrahamian never goes down on the first hit. He didn't go down on the first hit a lot of this game as well, but Ramiro Rios came up and would clean everything up. Got to give a little love to Riley Wynn, the corner. Had a pick 6 that kind of really set things in motion in terms of blowing that game open in the first quarter. Then came back about a couple of possessions later, had a big fumble recovery, which led to another Stanley touchdown. It was an all-out tremendous effort from Granada Hills, and it was the kind of effort seeing them play on both sides of the ball that really gave you the impression that this is a special team. This is going to be a special year for them, and they're going to make a lot of noise. I do want to touch a little bit on Kennedy because as I was live tweeting the game, someone had there was a Twitter response where someone said, "Well, I thought Kennedy was supposed to be good," and my response to that is, this game says more about what Granada Hills is than what Kennedy is. Kennedy is still a legit team. Sometimes it goes bad. Sometimes it gets out of hand when you're playing against talented players. If they weren't going against Darrell and Dijon Stanley, who literally can score every time they touch the ball, maybe that game doesn't get out of hand. Yes, it was 30-0 after the first quarter, but it was 30-0. I couldn't even believe my eyes because I didn't realize that they had scored so many times that quickly as I'm watching the game on the sideline. Because when someone's scoring every time they touch the ball, you look up and you're like, "Oh, right, you're right. 1, 2, 3. They scored 4. Yeah, wow, they scored 4 times." Because Kennedy just didn't even have a chance to get into the game because these kids were so dynamic. Talking to Troy Cassidy after the game, he basically reiterated that sentiment where he was like, "Look, sometimes you go against special athletes like that, you make one mistake and you're playing behind the 8 ball. You make 2 mistakes, you're out of the game." And that's kind of where they found themselves. Fuentes Gutierrez, their receiver, tough kid. He played his heart out all night. The most successful play that Kennedy were able to put together on offense, because they couldn't really run the ball, is they would run like a bubble screen, and this kid would catch it and he'd weave his way through the defense. He had a 30-yard touchdown where he weaved his way through the Granada defense. It was a tough go all night for him. He got beat up, banged up. He kept coming back. Troy Cassidy gave him love after the game, saying that that's one of the reasons why he loves coaching his team, because of kids like that who every week they show up and they're going to fight. Down 30, down 40, doesn't matter. They're going to fight. Even when Kennedy was coming out of the locker room at halftime, they were all just telling each other, "We don't care. We're going to fight until the final whistle." And they did. I talked to Coach Bucky Brooks after the game, and I asked him, I said, and I had tweeted it out, 50-12 at halftime. That's a pretty big statement to the rest of the city section of what this team is capable of. And I asked him, where do you think this leaves you in terms of a team like Kennedy, who got a big piece in the LA Times about what they could potentially be this year, and you guys you were up 40 at halftime. What kind of statement does that make? And he was, he downplayed it and he said, that's not really what I'm worried about. Would it be nice to run the table and end up open division? Yeah, sure. That'd be cool. That'd be cool for my seniors to be playing in the open division, have a shot at playing for the open division championship. He said, but you know what? That stuff will play itself out. We've got plenty of tough games, obviously, coming up on our schedule. We handle our business there, and then we let the chips fall where they may. He was like, I'm more concerned, one, we're getting the Tina back tonight and making sure our seniors, especially for like Dijon, because he didn't play last year. He missed the game last year because of injury, a game that they narrowly lost. And you could almost feel there was a sense from him and the rest of those guys that, okay, I didn't play last year. I'm playing this year, and it's going to be a little different. So kudos to both teams. It was a hard-fought game. Even with the scoreline being the way it was, there was plenty of big plays to go around on both sides, and it was a very entertaining game.
So, and that on the heels of that, we go into our player of the week, and you said it. It looks like it will be Darrell Stanley. It was a star-making night. It's kind of really a coming out party. If Dijon is kind of doing his thing, and then you're up big, and you're like, well, okay, we're not going to put him at risk. And then Darrell just takes over, and you're talking. We said this last week and the week before. When you have a player getting 10 touches, 14 touches, and that's it. A lot of that is coming early, and then they're resting. And so imagine what they would do over the course of an entire game.
And you want to know, and you want to know what's insane about this particular team is they're not just too deep at that running back position with the Stanleys. And Brooks kind of touched on it after the game. They're really 3 deep because the kid who is third on the depth chart behind them in terms of getting touches, he capped the game with a 50-yard touchdown where he broke a couple tackles, made a cut, got outside, and then he flew down the sideline for 50 yards for a touchdown. And that kid would probably be starting at a few other places if he wanted to. So even with them losing Dijon after this year, they're still going to have a 2-headed monster in that backfield with a junior in Darrell Stanley who is doing what he's doing as a sophomore on the varsity level, and then this kid DJ Williams who plays behind them. So they have talent in waves that they're going to come after you with, and it is going to be very interesting to see how the rest of the teams in the West Valley deal with that this year.
Yeah, that's going to be the big question. But I also want to give out a couple of honorable mention shout-outs. Isaiah Ramo, like we said, he ran for 293 yards and 4 touchdowns on 14 carries. I don't have the total numbers, but that's something like almost 800 yards in 3 games.
Yeah.
And so this is a kid that find ways to get eyes on. And the other two, we've seen. Corey Hall had 6 catches for 231 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Corey Hall doing Corey Hall things.
And
the only way I can describe it right now.
He still might be, if I were ranking guys that you have to see. Obviously, the Stanleys are there, Ramo's there, Jalen Burt is there in terms of kids that you just want to see play in person. Corey Hall still might be at the top of the list because of what he does on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
He can catch it. He can catch a 5-yard slant, stiff arm 3 people and take it to the house, but he will also come downhill on defense and knock you in the next week. So he still might be my favorite player to watch so far this year. And we're going to get to see quite a few of these guys lock horns very soon.
Yeah. And I'll finish off the honorable mentions. Donovan Powell had 71 yards on the ground with 1 touchdown.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a pretty almost comprehensive win against a very game opponent in Canoga, to put up that number, it's definitely worth talking about.
Yeah.
When we're here at this point. But now we're going to look forward at the upcoming week where the East Valley League jumps headfirst into league play, and Valley Mission gets started. And West Valley has that final test before they get in. So this is pretty much where we're going to figure out, who's who in terms of league, because there's some really big matchups right off the bat. You have a surprising Poly team going up against Chavez, and Poly has opened some eyes with the way they've played before the Eagle Rock game this past week. And so going into league, there's definitely a lot of confidence there. And Chavez has been tough against everybody. There's the expectation in my end that Chavez will come out on top, but the way Poly's been playing, I don't expect it to be any kind of a walk at all. It's going to be a bit of a fight, and whoever takes it all the way is going to walk out on top.
Scrappy. I think scrappy is the word that describes what this game is going to be. These are two teams who, quite frankly, see an opportunity in front of them. Verdugo hasn't looked the part of a team that's going to win the title so far. There's still time for them to figure some things out. Grant's very up and down. North Hollywood is going to be good, but if you're coming from them, and Monroe is undefeated, but if you're coming from the perspective of Poly or Chavez, there's no way you don't believe that you can compete with all of these teams. And it kind of starts with the first one. So for these two teams who have kind of shown that they can fight everybody, having to fight each other at the start of league play, expect it to get a little chippy out there, expect it to get a little rough, and expect these teams to go after each other, because 1-0 at the start of league play is what you need if you want to contend and be in the top portion of that league. So,
and staying with the East Valley, North Hollywood is going to visit Arleta in the early game, and we've said this a couple times, but North Hollywood seems to be doing what Arleta's done in the past, and it's get the bell cow, give him the ball, and make way. Give him running room and let him go. Arleta's coming off a big win for them, getting into the win column against Santee. That's going to buoy. And looking at it, my question is Arleta going to be able to stop that run? And if they do, what's North Hollywood going to do?
Yeah.
And then capping East Valley action, Monroe visits Verdugo Hills. We've talked about Verdugo Hills not meeting expectations early in the season, and Monroe is undefeated
and exceeding those early season expectations,
blowing them out the water. And this is going to be a statement game for both teams.
Mm-hmm.
Planting your flag in the ground. Who are you? And it's exciting. It's on my short list of games that I want to see. Kennedy is going to look to rebound against Van Nuys, who, like we said earlier, they got their first win, and that's got to be exciting over there in the Wolves locker room. I don't care if it's 3-0, 30-0. When you go on the road, get a win, your first win, and you grind it out, that's going to carry. But they've got a tough test with Kennedy coming in.
Yeah, and for Van Nuys, it's a great opportunity to kind of build some confidence. Nothing bolsters your belief more than going out and actually picking up a W. So for them to get on the win, put one in the win column, yeah, they know they're going to have a tough test in a quite frankly a ticked off Kennedy team coming off of this week. But when you're coming off of a win, you can look at the guy next to you and say, okay, listen, we can play a little bit. We belong. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can hold up against, like I said, a Kennedy team they're going to be looking to get things back on track. They're not going to be happy about the way they played, especially that first half, and they're going to look to do the opposite of what happened to them this week. So we'll see exactly what Van Nuys has, because that Kennedy team they're going to be pissed when they come in there.
Yeah, and that kind of takes me to the next Valley Mission match. Reseda is going up against San Fernando, and these are two programs that coming off of big losses. We hope San Fernando's healthy.
Yeah,
that's all we can do at that point. And Reseda is going to be looking to make a statement. Before the season, Austin Ward told me he believed that as the team gelled, that if they came together the way he believed they could, they could battle for a third seed in that league. Now, at this point, I don't really know if that's possible with Panorama and Kennedy doing what they're doing. But even then, it's about being competitive and putting up the fight. So that's something I'm excited to watch as they go through Valley Mission play.
Yeah.
And then in non-leagues, there's tests all across the board. We mentioned Sylmar's got a big test. They're playing Crenshaw. They're hosting Crenshaw. And that's going to be a little kind of prove it moment. They got a big win last week. And then this past week, they withstood the elements and put up a big win against Grant. And Crenshaw's going to tell us more, pretty much. Where do they stand going into league? Do they really make it a 3-horse race for the top of league? Or are they looking at a third place finish? That's going to say a lot. Chatsworth has Heritage Christian, and that's a Southern section matchup for them, which kind of excites me. How's that front line going to stand up? That O-line has been giving Ramo space every single week. How much room are they going to be able to give him? What is he going to do with it? And on the flip side, Heritage Christian is getting ready for battle in a brand new league. And they've got some big games in league. So how are they going to prepare?
And it's a good test for them to kind of see where they are heading in the league, because you're going to have to face stiff competition when you get in league. And Ramo is the definition of stiff competition. We've seen him against competitive fronts refuse to go down with the first and second hit. So it takes the third guy to come and maybe have a shot to bring him down. So it'll be a tough, even though it's Southern section versus City section, this is one of the more hard-nosed City section teams you're going to deal with this year. So it's going to be a real litmus test for them to kind of gauge where they are before they head into stiff competition within their own league as well.
And we touched on it earlier with El Camino getting into the win column. They're going to travel to Narbonne, and that could be a winnable game for them if they stay to who they are. They have a chip, and if that chip stays on their shoulder, this is a game for them. And Granada Hills is going into Eagle Rock, and we touched on the score earlier, 52-7 against an East Valley team, and Granada Hills has shown what they do to the East Valley.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put down the teams in the league, but there is a bit of a talent gap, and you do what you can with what you have. But the test here for Granada Hills now is this Eagle Rock team just put a hurting, and you just put a hurting. It's almost, I feel like it's going to be a house battle. Just come in and two heavyweights coming at each other in non-league action.
Yeah, the question for any game that features Granada Hills this year is going to be, how good is your front seven? Because if your front seven can't get in the backfield before number one or number two get going, your back end is going to have a hard time dealing with the track speed that these two young men bring. And Eagle Rock is as tough of a team defensively as they will have faced so far this year. But I'm almost inclined to believe that the way Granada is going to approach this game is, can you stop us? Yeah, we know you're good, but let's see how good you are, because Dijon and Darrell Stanley have put the rest of the city section on notice that we're going to run through people, and we believe we can do it. And their front seven is as stout as you will find. They've got some big old boys up front on both sides of the ball, and they've got talent. So it's going to be interesting. I think that this is another one of those games. We come back here next week, and we're talking about Darrell or Dijon having a $150 on the ground and a few touchdowns and a win. I think the noise around them will start to really, really ramp up as they head in towards league play.
And with noise ramping up, there's one last game on our list for next week. And it's left there kind of by no accident. You and I circled this the moment it was announced.
Yeah.
Palisades is traveling into the Valley again to take on Cleveland. And this is not so, in my eyes, when I see this, I see Corey Hall and I see Donovan Powell look at this as, this is my coming out party.
Mm-hmm.
The game we missed with Palisades due to the route fire was Granada Hills, where you had the same idea looking at it on the schedule. But now when you've got someone like Corey Hall, who has been playing with a chip on his shoulder all season because he continues to believe that people are sleeping on him, he is going to be looking to make a statement against a team that is basically locked into the open division, and believes that they are the best team in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So come out and show me what you got. And that's what excites me about this, is you've got a well-coached team facing a top city team, and you have players who want to make a statement.
And that's sort of what's exciting about this matchup, right? Even when obviously for us, we cover Cleveland, we believe they're a really good team. But even the other side of it, it's really exciting to see a team like Palisades say, hey, look, we're planting our flag as one of the marquee teams here. And we are an open division threat. And we're going to prove that before we get in our league play. And we're going to go into the Valley and give us your tough teams. Like I said, they scheduled Granada. When that fell through, they scheduled Cleveland. They went and played St. John's. This team has been out here to let people know, like, we'll go anywhere, we'll play anybody, and we think we can play and beat anybody. So it's exciting to see a team sort of let you know we're a traveling show, and we will go where the best games are because we think that that's what's going to take us to an open division title. Something that Birmingham has had a stranglehold on for a few years. You are starting to see some of these teams outside of Venice and San Pedro say, hey, we're coming after you. We're coming for that spot. And Palisades is definitely showing themselves this year to be the team that definitely believes that they can go and beat anyone, any place, anytime. And we're going to get to see them again this week against a team that, if they come into this game thinking it's going to be easy, they could find themselves in a little bit of trouble playing against this Cleveland bunch. So, man, like you said, Corey Hall feels like this is a time for him to stamp himself as one of the best players in the city, and he's going to have the opportunity to do so against this Dolphins team.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an exciting slate next week. Stay tuned. We will have our Valley Gems posted in advance of the games, and that'll let you know the ones we are keeping the closest eye on.
Oh, also real quick.
Yes.
We left out Make one of the better matchups too this week, the Panorama game. Panorama and Canoga. And it's huge because Panorama's unbeaten. They're a team that's also saying, hey, look at us. We're going to make some noise this year. So just wanted to throw that one in there as well before we wrap up.
Yes. Don't know how that one slipped through. But yeah, Panorama is looking to kick off league with a statement win against Canoga. And we'll try to find a way to get eyes on as many of it as possible.
Yeah.
And like I said, keep your eyes out for our Valley Gems article, which will come out in advance of the games. That will tell you essentially where we're going to be, the games we're keeping our eyes on, and the ones we think might be hidden gems that people are sleeping on. So until next week, I'm Archer Siren and Kenny Hodges. Have a good one.
Peace.